Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, first, we got to let the elephant in the room. If we look a little goofy on the intro, it's because we were talking about cooking and cookbooks and butter recalls because people didn't know butter had milk in it, all the weirdness. But if you don't care about that insanity, welcome to season 5, people. And with that, same baddie podcast, great returning crew. And with that, we're going to let Miss Chloe Garner introduce herself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hello, hello, hello. I am Chloe Garner. I am the writer of a vast number of speculative fiction universes, most recently wandering around in a gigantic fantasy universe and now wandering off into space and science fiction, having a great time.
Just don't get lost and do a couple parsecs for us. You think Star Wars will ever live that down, or are they always going to be the one we mock for the unit of measurement?
Those things stick.
Yeah,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
All right, next we have Mr. Isaac Kraft returning from his dungeon where he slaves away at work every day. We freed him for this episode.
Glad to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Isaac Kraft. I write science fiction and fantasy with horror elements. I also do cover art and illustrations in my spare time.
Nice. And speaking of horror shows, we have a group chat for those that are frequent guests. We jokingly call it the podcast shenanigans. And someone recently shared the recipe for the pizza squared recipe when you get the square pizza in school. So I'm questioning, is that fit in the horror genre? Because I seem to remember getting sick on cafeteria food.
Oh, that was a good day when you saw square pizza, man. At least it's I was going to.
Then sometimes the meat on the meat lover pizza would make you sick if you is mystery meat. It's like crapshoot. Is it going to kill me today? Give me dysentery, or am I going to be okay? So but that's why our generation are survivors, because we played Russian roulette with our lives every time we ate in the cafeteria.
We drank from the hose.
Yeah,
we did.
man.
Which
All right, next we have the mini personalities of Miss Jana S Brown. Who are we talking to today?
Who, me? What? Where? I'm like Isaac. I never have any spare time. So I'm not returning from any spare time or doing anything in my spare time because I'm still looking for my spare time. But I'm Jana S Brown. I write science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, and other various shades of cool things, talking to the people in my head. The tagline is the weird and the wonderful with smoochies. So there's very often a romantic subplot or, shenanigans, because shenanigans are fun. And today we're talking sword and sorcery, where there's all kinds of shenanigans. So I'm excited to be here.
Shenanigans.
Freaking. All right, and next we have Mr. Jesse James Fain, the outlaw author himself. We did check, because Nick is law enforcement. We did verify that the warrants are temporarily suspended, so you are able to record with us today without looking over your shoulder. I guarantee you 100% any helicopter going over your house today is not the Men in Black coming for you.
Completely unrelated.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any U.S. warrants.
Notice
I
I had to specify.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse James Fain. I write sci-fi, mil sci-fi, urban fantasy, pretty much anything I can squeeze a gunfight, sword fight, or fist fight into. I spent a lot of time in the MMA gym, a lot of time on the gun range, and a little bit of time practicing those things in real life when I had to. And so I try to bring a little bit of real life combat to your fictional experiences. And that's me.
If that doesn't work out, Jesse, we're hiring at my job.
Yeah, I'm too old for that now.
No, there's a waiver.
You're good. Wait. Are they going to let the outlaw wear a badge now? Like cats and dogs getting along? What's going on here?
Oh,
hey, man.
Yeah,
Wyatt Earp,
regular action. Yeah, regular.
There's a lot of outlaws that got away with a badge for a long time. Wild Bill.
Yeah. All right, next and last, but certainly not least, we have the Mr. Canadian himself, Nathan Pedde.
I'm Nathan Pedde. I'm from the far dark north of Kazakhstan, and I currently write science fiction and fantasy. I am working on a medieval fantasy mecha. So if you think of big, giant walking robots fighting dragons and trolls and all that type of stuff.
As one does.
Then there's me.
In honor of Nathan coming on today, so the neighborhood I live in is a lot of transient people. It's sailors moving in and out. Some of the people that are international residents because they work at the Naval War College, that kind of thing. And so my current neighbor, because it's a rental, is Canadian. He's here on a military exchange program, and as his welcome to the neighborhood kind of thing, he did drop me off some Keurig cups for Tim Hortons, and I have to say, I am not impressed. So I'm now that I said that, I am probably banned from Canada land, but Canada land, I just can't do it. Your coffee is
my 8th grade shop teacher's last name was spelled Canada, but he was called Mr. Canada.
Well, Tim Hortons coffee isn't really good. It was good, and then Wendy's bought them out, and it just went downhill from there.
That's right.
So I blame the Yanks.
That's what happens when you sell things to Wendy's, you tit. Give your balls a tug, bud.
And then as for as long as you like poutine, you're in.
I love poutine.
So like I've told this story on the podcast, so I won't belabor the point. At one point in time, I was doing land navigation training at a base in northern Vermont. The lieutenant messed the map up and inverted it when he made photocopies, so north was south and south was north. We accidentally invaded Canada twice, armed, live rounds, because it was a live fire exercise. And while the brass were doing their thing and sorting it out, they were kind enough to detain us, sans weapons, in a facility, and they fed us poutine. And I have to say, sir, that is a war crime. It was disgusting. Okay. 0 stars. Do not recommend.
Oh my God, bud. You are 10 bucks.
Well, then no Canada for you. Sorry, bud.
How far did you get into this incursion into the Great White North?
Not very far. We were met by the Mounties. I was highly disappointed they were not wearing their red coats. Like that is also misleading. They're not allowed to wear camouflage. It's against the rules. They're supposed to wear their red coats. They're supposed to be like Dudley Do-Right, and they got to have the hat and the accent.
On a horse. On a horse.
They consider mounted on ATVs now and dirt bikes.
Yeah, that's what they were on, and they thought it was hilarious because the second day, like I told them, like, look, we gave them our weapons because we didn't want an international incident. Like if I shot them when we're not really at war, my first sergeant gets his panties in a wad. It's a bad thing.
You're probably the first unit to ever surrender to Canada.
Probably no. 1812, we did it twice.
Canada.
That's like surrendering. Do I need to start going over these Geneva suggestions that we created?
So the second day, the lieutenant got
never worked on the first time.
And I did say this time, I was like, because when we got back, I got my backside reamed because you never surrender your weapon. I'm like, so what was I supposed to do, sir? Shoot the Canadians? I'm like, come on.
I mean, no. Yeah. Tricky.
Face, right?
I mean,
like, if I had done
was anybody really going to know?
Nick, you know that, right? If I had shot, I would have been the scapegoat. No matter what happened, I'm the one going down. The lieutenant walking away scot-free. Probably with the promotion.
Have a PFC nearby?
No, we were all sergeants, but I was the one in charge, so I was the scapegoat.
Oh, God. Yeah, you were the PFC, dog.
Right, pretty much. Like as the team leader, new E5, or youngest E5, because at that point in time I'd worn them for 2 years. But so the second day when we go back, and I'm like, sir, I know this is the wrong coordinator. And the lieutenant's like, I am an officer. I went to West Point, I'll have you know. And, they get all uppity about the whole West Point ring knocker thing. And I'm like, the platoon sergeant was there this time. I'm like, you heard him order us to follow the map he gave us, right? I'm like, okay. So the second time we crossed with live rounds, we surrendered the ammo, but not the rifles. But we didn't tell them we all had rounds in our cargo pocket. The Dudley Do-Right did not do the pat down. So no crevice checks, no pocket checks. So we were armed that time. That's a good thing they didn't give us poutine the second day because it might have ended differently. Because that was just gross.
If it would stayed longer, we probably would have surrendered to you.
There's a video floating around of the Canadian Army marching, and like everyone's marching to their own drummer. Like their hands are like all flopping around. I'm like, is this an epilepsy convention or an army like marching maneuver? I don't know what's going on here. Gotta love the Twitters. All right. So this is the Blasters and Blades. And now that we've gone far afield, as we always do, and shenanigans were had, now it is time to talk about how we first found everybody. So actually, we all met in a tavern. We were looking for traveling companions. And, from there, it was just, one too many glasses of mead. Nick started talking about Lowe to his father's ancestors. And then from there, we might have fought a troll. It's hard to say. It gets a little fuzzy. But, stuff happens, right? Like, it's not our fault if we're intoxicated.
Best stuff starts in a tavern.
Always does.
It
That's how the
wasn't
Marine Corps started.
Did you hear
It
they're trying
wasn't
to
a troll. It wasn't a troll. It was a pixie.
And then JR knocked the bartender out and got us thrown out.
Yeah, but the good news is the Marines, they did start in a tavern. There's an organization of Marine that want to restart and reopen Ton Taverns close to the site of the original. And I'm just like, can we go there and start bar fights just on general principle? Is that allowed?
As a Army
First
soldier,
day.
yeah. The first day it opens, I'm picking a Marine and we're going at it.
Although I
It's killing time,
transcribed,
boys.
so my internship at Valley Forge, I transcribed the original 1700 series of the Boston Gazette. And there was actually an article from our founding. The complaint, and somebody put it in the letters to the editor, essentially, was that the founding fathers drank all of the bar dry and they didn't leave any for the civilians. When one company of regular colonial troops went through it, I'm like, some things never change.
Have you ever seen the bar tab for George Washington and some of the founding fathers after they sent the Declaration of Independence?
Makes you proud to be an American, doesn't it?
Oh, my Lord. I consider myself a professional heavyweight drinker. And my God, I was like, that would have killed me. Because I know the alcohol there was no ATF. There was no rules. There was no Food and Drug Administration. It was just like, just keep drinking till you go blind, I guess.
And whatever Billy Bob brews up in the back 50, that's just what we got. So it was an interesting time to hopefully you stay alive and the food doesn't kill you. But all right. Now that we got that out of the way, we do have to ask the religion questions. Is everybody ready for this? All right. So King Arthur, Willow, or Legend? Jesse.
Gonna go with the legend. Just my preference out of all of them. I think they're all great, but definitely legend for me.
It's an excellent choice. Excellent choice. Jana or Jenna, whatever you prefer today.
Willow has the nostalgia factor going for it. And I use the, I dwell in darkness without you and it went away. Every time that my daughter forgets something or walks away or says, I had to go somewhere else. And I'm like, I dwell in darkness without you and it went away. So that's my very, very favorite.
Possibly. All right, Nathan. King Arthur, Willow, or Legend?
Willow.
Why?
It's the Everman story. This guy is not a knight. He's not a warrior. He's not supposed to be there. Yet he steps up anyways and does it.
And you get a classic line from it. I stole that baby from that stupid daikini while he was taking a pee-pee.
There's that.
That was well executed, friend.
All right, Chloe.
Dragonheart.
Okay, you're going off script.
I can't do it. Just the exposure that I had to movies was in a funny order, and that was one of the very first ones I had where one of the characters was not a real human being, and I was in the theater to watch it, as I recall, and it was just this really sense of epic to it that was really new to me, and that's what makes it really foundational.
All right, Isaac.
I'm going to go with Legend.
Is there a reason?
Goblins and unicorns and slaying the next incarnation of Tim Curry.
Okay, it's a valid reason. All right, Nick.
I'm going to go with Legend. Just to double back on what Isaac was saying, you can judge a person based on where they met Tim Curry for the first time. And that was the first time I was introduced to Tim Curry was through Legend as he played the Darkness. And the goblins were hilarious, Rising fire higher, rising fire, singing music like a choir. I mean, that movie scared the shit out of me. But it was so awesome. You know, it's a really good sword and sorcery tale. It's very akin to another everyman. You have Jack, the forest human, that's in touch with the fairies and the dwarves and all the other mystical creatures, and he has a connection to the unicorns. It's just like at the time I saw that, I was just like, man, this is awesome. This is everything I could possibly want in a movie outside of Star Wars.
Okay, Stabby.
That's me. What was the question?
Willow or Legend?
Sword in the Stone.
You can't ever stay on script, can you?
No, that's why you love me.
All right, so for me, I'm going to go with King Arthur, the 2004 version, where King Arthur is a Roman lord, and it's the fighting the barbarians. Like it's just awesome. I like that they actually factored in tactics and they made an effort to get it right. I mean, I don't know that they were tactics they would have necessarily used, but at least logic was applied, and that's a step in the right direction. Because sometimes it's like you watch the fight scenes and it's like, is this an army trying to commit suicide on purpose? Is that what's going on? Because then it makes sense. Don't get me started about the Game of Thrones combat tactical planning. Oh, all right. Because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Conan the Barbarian, Krull, or Hawk the Slayer. Jesse.
I have to go with Conan. I don't know how well it's going to show up for everyone watching, but that
Oh, sweet.
a whole quarter of my arm is Conan and bleed. There we go. Yeah. So Conan is a huge influence for me. The Robert E. Howard tales, especially. Queen of the Black Coast is one of my absolute favorite stories of all time. Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, hear the lamentations of their women. Absolutely. So.
All right, Jana.
Okay, Conan is right up there for lots and lots of great reasons. But when I was a kid, Crow was one of those movies that I watched when I was really sick and kind of half drunk on cold medicine. So it still has this funny place in my heart simply based on that experience. And when I am ill, that's one of those that I will pull back up because I don't have to think about it. It's got some fun action and adventure going on, the princess in danger, the whole 9 yards. And that is I am sick and completely out of it. That or Twister. Those are the two movies I watch when I'm sick. So Conan's better for a lot of reasons as sword and sorcery, but Crow gets my sickness vote, my nostalgia vote.
So it's the sober Jana versus drugged up cold medicine Jana. Got it.
Darn straight.
As one does. All right, Nathan, stop hiding. Show yourself, or I'll take away your poutine.
Conan, all the way.
Okay. No. Do you have a favorite version? Because I know, was it somebody did a remake? Jason Momoa, I think. I haven't seen the remake.
I haven't seen it either. I've seen the old ones.
So the Schwarzenegger.
The Schwarzenegger.
Arnold.
Damn right.
Steroid Arnold was the best Arnold.
The remake is good, but it suffers from some story issues. Jason Momoa actually did a pretty good Conan, but if you watch anything of it, at least watch the opening scene with Conan as a kid. That part, they absolutely nailed. It was great.
I'll tell you what, we will put Conan, the reboot, versus Conan, the original, on a season 5 panel list.
That would be cool.
All right, Chloe.
Okay, so Conan is not really in the strike zone for me when I was at that age where those were the real cutting edge of what fantasy was doing. I liked Beastmaster. This is what I wanted my fantasy to be like, just off in the wilderness with all of the animals and having the adventures. That was so when people talk about Conan, my branding keeps trying to push it back over to be Beastmaster.
Okay. I mean, that's a good movie too. We're actually going to be doing a review for that for season 5. So, because one of our patrons has requested it, and we put him off for a year and a half, so I figured we better deliver.
And Mark Singer made me question my sexuality for the longest time.
I mean, we don't judge here at the Blasters Blades podcast. Don't ask, don't tell. Isaac?
As much as I like Conan, I'm going to go with Kroll, but I could also go off-road and choose He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Okay. All right, Nick. Let your freak flag fly and answer this one.
Oh, man. I don't know. I was going to go off script and say Beastmaster, but we're covering that in a later episode. So I'm going to go with Lady Hawk.
All right, Stabby. Oh, no, go ahead, Nick. Why? If you wanted to add.
Okay, well, I mean, it wasn't set up to be like a traditional sword and sorcery, but there was magic involved, and you had these star-crossed lovers. It was like this really non-depressing Romeo and Juliet. And then you had Michelle Pfeiffer, which pretty much set the standard of what I was looking for in a woman physically. Short hair, blonde, also on stage right now. And he had the coolest helm. Like at the end, he comes in that giant ass horse, and he thought he'd lost the sword of his ancestor, his father's, and he was supposed to, this stone, this one was mine, and you lost it. And he comes in and he's got this crazy helm that I've never seen before. And as a young, impressionable child, I was like, that is the coolest knight's helmet I've ever seen in my life. And then he had the horse's name, I think, was Goliath, something like that. It was really and the fight scenes were awesome. It's a love story. People are like, Nick, you're so like, how is someone like you a hopeless romantic? I'm like, because of that freaking movie right there. And Matthew Broderick, getting torn up by the wolf.
All right, Stabby.
I was gonna say Kroll, but the more that I kept hearing everybody say it, all I could hear in my head was How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and her going, Kroll, the Warrior King. So I'm gonna go with Dungeons and Dragons because that movie just makes me happy.
Okay, I'm going to go with Kroll because Liam Neeson as Keegan, a member of the Bandits with axe-wielding jovial polygamist. Like, he's just happy with his many wives wielding his axe, as one does. And you do need an axe to keep all those mother-in-laws at bay, so it fits. And frickin' Liam Neeson when he was young. So, and, he's just...
And the Cyclops was so horrible, but so awesome at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1983, all right? Like, you got to cut it a little slack.
I do. I cut it a lot of slack. A lot of things from the 80s, I cut a lot of slack. But then you have films like Legend.
Fair. And I thought about putting Beowulf on there, but, obviously we didn't want to spend hours on the discussion before the episode. Again, we're trying to balance it. And I know, like, I wrote a dissertation on Beowulf in college as an English major. So, like, I get a little stupid on that subject. But I did see in the side chat where crimes were being committed in 9 countries in Europe that was a list for some people. So, all right. With the risk of running afoul, what is your favorite weapon to see in a sword and sorcery story? Jesse?
I am a big fan of the proper depiction of how to use an axe in combat. That is always a cool thing for me. I don't think it happens very often, but when it does, I think that's really cool.
That does, go to my American heart because, tomahawks are part of our earliest American tradition when it comes to fighting. So I can dig it, the hand axe. All right, Jana, give us a dignified answer.
Oh, you want a dignified answer?
No, I'm just joking. Be you, dignified or not.
We don't do dignified here.
You're on the wrong show, my lady.
I did medieval recreation and live still fighting for 7 years. 10 years, a lot of years back when my joints would allow me to do that. And I became a huge fan of Sword and Shield used properly. It's also why I have a trashed shoulder, but it was a lot of fun. And I like seeing the Sword and Shield combination, the offense and the defense. It's such a balanced set of weaponry. And it means that you can chase archers across the fields and watch them go, ah! And that was always so fun. So I really do love the Sword and Shield.
Whenever I game, I do Sword and Shield for my tank as well. And
Awesome.
I don't like to do the magic users because then you got to be all thinky, and I just like stabbing things and going all murder hobo. So Sword and Shield it is. Oh. There's a reason we went infantry, Nick. Let's not lie.
Yeah, I mean, if I want to do spells and shit, I would do artillery or something like that.
Exactly. All that math magic stuff going on. All right, Chloe.
Yeah,
It's all
Sword
about
and Shield is
science.
okay.
Oh, no, Nathan, I skipped you. I am so sorry. I almost missed you in Canada land.
Sorry, eh?
So if we're looking at practicality for just the story-wise, genre-wise, you're looking at the two-handed longsword, the claymore, the Zweihander, something like that. If you're going just genre-specific. If you're looking at something more historical practicality, it's the spear. The spear is versatile, it's cheap, and you can do a lot with it.
And I defeated
Or
the
you could
Persians.
be magnified and you could turn your spear into a pike, and it sounds cooler and more mean.
Yeah, it's like an extra 3 feet.
Exactly.
All right, Chloe.
3 feet is a
Okay.
lot.
So if we're talking aesthetic and we don't really care about how this thing is applied or used, it really is just a gigantic battle axe, because those things have got all of the metal working going on and they go with a really big dude. And I cannot beat that. There is no bid that goes higher than that. When you're talking about a more practical and a non-aesthetic thing, I really like Welsh longbows and archers.
Okay. I have a theory that is upset. I've got some hate mail for it, but I do believe that Welsh, the language, is not real. They just do that when the English show up to mess with them. And then as soon as they leave, they're like, hey, can you believe that fool thinks we talk like that? Because if you ever look at
There's
like,
some truth to that.
if you ever look at like the spelling of things, I'm like, there's no way. Like they just shit some letters on a page and they just, they're just messing with people. Like, no way. It's not real.
It reminds me of a joke. An English
Medieval
man was
English
down in
Klingon.
he sees two ladies at the bar. He goes, "Are you?" And he hears them talk. He's like, "Are you two ladies Welsh?" She's like, "Wales." He's like, "Are you two whales from?" I messed it up, but
I'm still picking up what you're laying down, Nick. All right, Isaac.
In terms of something like the most recent King Arthur, or even the most recent Robin Hood, I'd probably agree with the longbow, or just a long sword. But because we're talking about sword and sorcery, I'm going to go with something like the magic rune sword that transforms, something like
So
He-Man,
magic sword.
or you throw it and it comes back to you, and it does the whirly sound, and it cuts through things like a chainsaw, and it comes back to you, and he's got one. Oh no, what?
Okay. Magic is an acceptable answer in sword and sorcery, named weapons and whatnot. All right, Nick.
ooh, I thought I had an answer, and then Chloe started talking about spears, and I was like, then I started thinking about 300, and I love that movie, and it is considered a sword and sorcery film, even though it's based off Thermopylae. Stylistically, it was just awesome to watch him wield that thing, especially with the phalanx formation. They were whipping it around, and even though they never broke ranks, but in the movie they broke ranks and then closed with the enemy, and they were flipping around, and just it was awesome. So I'm a fan of that.
The Spartans were the original Death Before Dishonor, although they said come back with your shield or on it. So dead or victorious were your only two options.
Yeah,
now
come back with your shield or on it.
Yeah, they lost a lot more than we like to portray in like popular mythical culture, because the legend of the Spartans doesn't quite match up with the reality of what they were. But
well, it just wasn't the Spartans. I mean, you had some other elements there from the different nation states.
Well, I'm not even talking about their monopoly. I'm just talking more broadly as a culture. We've sort of glorified them in modern times for more than they were. I mean, because they lost to the freaking Athenians in the end. All right. And those weirdos, I'm just saying. All right.
Those philosophers and boy lovers.
Sure. Stabby.
That's from the movie. That's from the movie. I'm just saying.
I know.
What?
Favorite weapon to see in sword and sorcery. Sorcery?
The Morning Star.
Ooh, that's a good one. I like
Yes, because as much as it seems like it would be fun to swing a mace around, it's very impractical. You're more than likely going to hit yourself with it. So having the mace attached to the end of the stick and just smacking people with it, genius. And apparently I love it just enough that when Nick drew me as a comic book character, he made that my weapon of choice. So
that's a good answer. So, like, I dig the mace and the flail just because they look cool. But if in terms of practicality, like Jana, I'm going back to the sword and the shield every time. Although there is certainly room for a spear or a pike. Although, the true outfitted warrior is going to have like more than one weapon because you start with the spear, and then when they get too close, then you draw the other things. But I mean, if we want to go truly sword and sorcery, you can't beat a good trebuchet, right? Like, I mean, you reach out and touch somebody and throw giant rocks at them.
yeah, but if you think about so I think I'm trying to find how to phrase this.
Carefully.
The whole thing with I think my love for the Morning Star comes to the fact that it's still portrayed in movies and books and comic books and everything today. It's people putting nails and whatnot through their baseball bats to beat up zombies, or wrapping their baseball bats in barbed wire. Like, it's the same concept. And I love the fact that it still made its way through history. It's just changed with the way that we are now.
Okay. Go ahead, Nathan.
If you're talking about the weapons and practicality of them, each of them, like the axe, the sword, the mace, the spear, they all have different uses, right? Like, a sword is not getting you through that metal armor. No matter what the movies put in there, if you got metal on you, the sword's not cutting through it. The weight of the sword, however, is still going to bash you. You're still going to feel that blow, and that's where the mace comes in. So if you have somebody with a plate of, nice big cuirass, you ain't cutting that. However, you get a mace, you're going to break some ribs. And once those ribs are broken, he's out of the fight. He's down. Especially if one of the ribs pokes his lung. Then he's really down.
And it's got a lot of spikes. So it's stabby, 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 stab.
That's why you like it.
I'm picturing a troll running around with a trebuchet, using it as a blunt force weapon. And I'm down. I think this one wins.
I was thinking more of a two-man fire team of trolls, one person aiming, the other person holding it.
Go on.
I would see the troll swinging it from the wrong end, though. Like, he'd be holding the throwing end, swinging the machine.
I don't know. I kind of see the troll using it like a AT-4 or a Carl Gustav rocket.
That's what I was going to say. Just name on the
shoulder mounted
weapon.
So it is the shoulder rocket for the troll that got everyone talking. Okay.
He's like, load me up.
I see what your priorities are. All right. And now the most important question we're going to ask all night, since it is the sword and sorcery panel. What is your favorite magic spell to see in a sword and sorcery? Jesse?
I am a big necromancy fan. I spent a whole short story on it. It'll eventually be a whole novel on it, on the creative and inventive ways in the use of necromancy. So a good old raising of the dead is it for me.
I don't know what to say about that. Hopefully your shrink does not read your books because they might have some words. But, I mean, make great cannon fodder is all I'm going to say. All right, Jana.
Okay, that's a hard one because I get into the offense versus defense. I write a lot of healers, a lot of the ability to bring somebody back from that brink. I'm working on a short story right now that's modern day. And what happens to football if you've got actual honest to goodness healers on the sideline? Football becomes a much more violent thing if you know that you can fix anything and you can fix it that fast. So healing becomes a really interesting spell and setup there for being able to put people right back into combat. So that's my favorite there, but I do have a soft spot for pyrokinetics. You know, throwing fire around, there's just fire good.
Old school.
Darn straight.
Okay. Healing magic is always good when every party needs a healer and nobody wants to do it because it's not as fun as stabbing people in the face.
I want to do it. I love playing the cleric. The battle cleric is totally a thing, and it rocks.
I'm more of a paladin guy. I like the big beefy dude that has religion on his side carrying a giant ass sword.
Yes, sir.
All right, Nathan, favorite magic spell. If you say poutine, I'm ejecting you from the show.
No. I'll allow it.
In stuff I like reading, like practicality wise, it's fireball. Just throw fire on his face and he's running away. And the stuff I write though, I find that I do a lot of shooting ice shards at them because it's different. All of a sudden you got this big long yard stick of ice flying at your face. It says something.
I took a criminology class in college because it was part of the requirement for poli-sci, and they asked us to plan the perfect murder because we were working with a local detective that comes in to help. And that was how I planned my perfect murder for this class, is you wait till winter, you stab them with an icicle, the evidence melts, they can never use it against you in court. I'm just saying. So ice shard for the win. I'm digging it. And if anybody heard this is not premeditation, I would never do that for real. I have no knowledge of anything. All right.
Just
Chloe.
kidding. Just kidding.
In Minecraft. Chloe, favorite magic?
I really like the drama of the teleport, where that's used with the big shiny flash and the big arm motion and the cape and all of that. There's just such a flair to it. It's not very useful as a battle technique, but it's just a wizard thing to do.
No. Like if you're standing and I'm facing you and you want to do something and suddenly you step behind me and you stab me in the back while I'm still expecting. No, perfectly tactical use of that. I wrote a story where I did that. Or they shoot an arrow at the guy and then you open a portal, the arrow goes through and he shoots himself. Right? I mean, come on. Isaac, wow us with your creativity.
It would be more like the cold aura to slow enemies down. Based off not literature or reading, but video games. The big thing was where they hit you and they take the damage that they hit from you is ultimately it's going to get you because the damage is far worse. But slowing them down makes it where you still have time to hit the enemy, or at least escape. So it's not necessarily as much as ice shards, as much as they can't move. And if not that, then I'm more for illusion.
Okay. Illusion magic it is. I mean, that can be used creatively. I mean, the only limitation is your imagination. So, all right, Nick. Tell us how you're going to burn the world down with your favorite fireball spell. I mean, what was your favorite magical spell?
The Paladin is summoned AT4. No, I one of my favorite magic spells, at least in the movies, is from Excalibur, the Dragon's Breath that Merlin uses in the beginning. Um, I thought that was really cool, and it just filled the lands with mist, so Uther could go and do unsavory things to his enemy's wife.
Greek fire, basically.
Yeah, now Greek fire is more napalmish,
Okay.
I would think.
Stabby, favorite magic spell?
I would honestly be the person that I want to just strike somebody down with lightning.
Oh shit!
Because I think, like with me, running is not an option. Like if you see me running, you better be right on my tail because I don't run. But say there's that guy over there and he needs to go away, and I could just be like,
Abracadabra, but with lightning.
Oh no,
yeah, and I don't have to move, and I'm just there, and he's way over there, and then.
Is that what happens when people interrupt you when you're reading a book?
No, I start throwing shoes.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, I'm down for the fireball. In general, I like elemental magic just because it's just kind of visually cool when you play a lot of the computer game versions of RPGs. Because I can vision that when I play tabletop, it still has the same effect in my head. And everybody giggles like loons when they burn things down with fireballs. And then, of course, when you throw the fireball and the party is, danger close, you're like, it's okay. I'll allow it. It reminds me of that scene from Shrek. Some of you may die. It's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
I introduced my kid in the army now. And,
with Polly Shore? Oh, my goodness.
Yes. And he's like, pull the pin, drop the pin, throw the grenade. Drop the pin, throw the grenade. And he's like, okay, got it. Pull the pin, drop the pin, throw the grenade. Got it.
And that's what's funny about that is it happens every cycle. One of the guys when I was going through basic, one of the guys when I was going through basic did that. Although he did not fight the drill sergeant who threw him out of the foxhole and then followed him, so the grenade just blew up in the foxhole. But yeah, it happens routinely. People hold it, then they panic and they're like, "Oh, I've got this boomstick in my hand. Let us put it at my feet instead." And it just happens every time. Although in the Army now has the best line, was that our truck drill sergeant? When he puts the AT-4 backwards and he just, as one does, you shoot behind you instead. It is a good thing he made sure his backblast area was in fact clear. So excellent choice. I go with the elemental though. All right. So this is the part where normally we would talk about coffee, but we've been shenaniganing for 42 minutes. At least half of that though, we were talking magic and sorcery and swords and stuff. So I think we are kind of on topic-ish. So as we wrap up, Stabby, you could just tell us what coffee you're drinking for the new 2025. What your coffee vibes are, and then we'll allow it. And in the meantime, we're going to air that beautiful commercial footage. All right. Boom.
Introducing The Shaman's Bones, Migratory Farmers Book 1 by Hunter K. Wallace. This fantasy features fierce animal gods, omens of the stars, and a quest to find a very special set of bones. When Yolanda is made an ambassador in her caravan of migratory farmers, it's a dream come true, until a trade in a village on the equator goes terribly wrong. The skies foretell trouble, the spirit animals are angry, and shadow monsters prowl the night. Worst of all, Yolanda is supposed to fix everything. To do so, she'll need the bones to summon the greatest spirit animal of all. Yolanda isn't alone. She has the help of a resentful young man whose life she has ruined, a gorgeous bone collector obsessed with corpses, a nanny turned sleuth, and a very attractive blasphemer who hates the spirits even more than she does. She'd rather be alone. Or stealing glances at the broad-shouldered, brown-eyed blasphemer. No, she'd rather be alone. Maybe. Learn more about The Shaman's Bones and other works by Hunter K. Wallace at hunterkwallace.com.
And if you go to the link and you follow her on Facebook, she has amazing pictures of chickens. on her profile because she has chickens. And who doesn't love a good cluck cluck in the morning, you know? And with Nick, I know what you're saying in your head. I can see it. I can see that hamster rolling. That is not safe for radio. And with that, we're going to define our terms. All right. So what is exactly sword and sorcery as a genre? Save Nick from himself.
It's the much dirtier, much more violent cousin of high fantasy. So you have the Lord of the Rings with pretty elves and clean people and lots of politics and lots of rules and things like that. And sword and sorcery is also, it's called heroic fantasy. It's what most of us think about when we play Dungeons and Dragons. It is brawny people with big weapons, kicking the crap out of things, looting stuff, all of the above. It's Conan. It's all these things that we think about. That's kind of the classic fantasy genre before it got highfalutin.
No, I think that
Chloe's laughing at me, so add, please.
the scope is a lot closer into the heroes and not trying to have the larger political context. Like they live in a big context, and that's fine, but that context is not really what they're up against. It's not a part of their protagonist or their antagonist for this conflict. They have a guy at the other end of a weapon or the other end of a wand, and that's what we're doing.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to the definition?
I think that covers it pretty well.
So the commoner's version of high fantasy with more stabbing. With 100% more stabbing.
And it's got a lot of like blue collar type as opposed to like princes and princesses, even though those are involved. So it usually involves a barbarian. It's a classic D&D team. Usually it's a barbarian, it's a thief, it's some guy that does magic, and sometimes that goes awry because he doesn't know how to use it properly. You know, and then there's a lot of gratuitous sex and violence. It's the male fantasy from the 80s and 70s.
So does it have enough stabbing to keep Stabby happy?
It should.
I don't know. I can't answer that. She has to answer that.
I just see her grinning evilly at the thought of stabbing people, so I thought we'd weigh in.
Yeah, but it's usually me.
All right. So
it also goes back to what several people said about when we're talking about movie choices and that kind of thing. We get a lot of everyman kind of characters. It's some dude who steps up. It's the farmer who steps up. It's the somebody out there who orcs run through his field and he says, no, this can't be a thing. So that it is that very everyman kind of field. And they may end up becoming something more, but they don't usually start there. We get a lot of stories where they end and okay, now at the end they've become a prince, they've become a ruler, a warlord, or whatever, but very often they start from nothing and we watch them work their way up. And it's part of why a lot of lit RPG that is really, really hot right now is heroic fantasy. It's just heroic fantasy with number crunching.
The thing that you see, even when it is a highborn character, they generally will start off not realizing it. Like somebody mentioned Sword in the Stone, where he's, he might be someone important, but he didn't start off knowing that. So he's, doing the scut work. And so even though he might secretly be a prince and not know it, he still starts off as the everyman.
The humble beginnings.
Yeah.
Even though he knows he's destined for some greatness. I mean,
even if he doesn't know.
Yeah, and he doesn't know. And like you take tales like The Hobbit, where my adventure started because I got drunk in a bar with a wizard once. Next thing you know, I'm like, I'm going on an adventure, and there's golems and all these fantastical creatures. Those are fun to read, other than the highborns, like in Game of Thrones, which was interesting for a couple of seasons, but it was a bunch of rich assholes. That, oh my God, the problems of the little people are now my problems. Shit. And there's dragons.
They're usually not the chosen one.
Go ahead, Nathan.
They're usually not the chosen one at all. They're not usually some prophesized person. They're just a guy who decided he had to do a thing. And that involved getting a big sword.
Okay.
That's important, and its pulp origins are also important. That it shares a lot of beginnings. Like Conan is a Weird Tales property. It's short stories that are in magazines that are meant specifically to entertain. There's not always a higher theme. It's this really cool dude, or this really cool sorcerer, or this really cool lady, Red Sonja, whoever, that just goes and does cool stuff. Nick talked about like a thief and a wizard and a magic user and a barbarian. Conan was all of those things. A thief, a reaver, a pirate king, eventually becomes a king of one of the most rich and powerful nations. And it's a dynamic character that grows and changes over time.
Sometimes they throw a necromancer in there for a little razzle dazzle.
Would you say that the genre tolerates camp better than most other fantasy? Because that's how it feels.
Oh, definitely. I think it relies on camp. I think that's what that's the comic relief distresses the audience, because there are these high stakes for such, I don't want to say small people, but people that consider themselves small. It's like they don't consider that they have the power to impact the world that they live in. So you throw that camp in there, and it adds a little gallows humor to it, a little soldier humor. It's stuff that a lot of people can relate to. It's like, man, if I was just a normal dude in this situation, because in firefights, you'd have some guy just crack a joke. Now you're laughing while your life's in danger and rounds are cracking by your head. Same thing in that realm too. It adds that comic relief. It distresses the audience, and it kind of makes them relax a little bit, where they can decompress and from the high tension stakes that they're throwing into these stories.
Okay, Isaac, you had something to say?
I'm understanding it's more or less what would be considered men's fiction, where it's like take Conan. He's a big, larger-than-life guy with a heavy weapon, and he might have support characters all around him to help him, but ultimately he's the guy who does what needs to get done with a dangerous adventure. He's done thieving before. He's often familiar with the back alleys and back streets and dangerous places that if you don't know where it is, you're going to die, but he knows where these are. And castles and dungeons and places, and often he winds up kicking villains' butt and getting the girl.
It's like Nick said in the intro when we were talking about Conan, is the goal of every man is to, kill your enemies, drive them in front of you, and hear the lamentations of their women. I'm butchering the quote, but that's the general idea.
Oh, I can do it, and I can do it in his voice if you'd like.
Go for it.
Conan, what is best in life? That's and I've been diffused. Holy shit. To crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of the women.
Okay. So we've talked about a little bit.
Good.
No, go ahead, Jana. I was going to pivot a little bit, so go ahead and get it out.
There's a lot of giving the story its premise, because we were talking with some of the weapons, we were talking about, touching on a little bit of reality. And like I say, having been out there with a sword and shield and banging it off of people, battles don't last very long. And one guy generally does not chew through that many people before somebody else takes him out. A lot of what we see and we talk about in these stories, they're not realistic. Swinging around a two-handed sword for a long time doesn't happen because it's tiring work. And so there's a lot of things that you take that realism and you stretch it really, really far and say, for the purposes of this, yeah, we do have the one guy who's going to chew through and mow through this entire thing. And we accept that that's okay because he's the hero.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is anybody that's even just done any kind of martial arts like wrestling, like there's a reason each round is only 3 minutes and the match is done in under 10 in most cases, maybe even sooner, because you can only push your body that hard for a short period of time. There's a reason why some of the more organized, like the Roman Legion and the Greek phalanx, they would rotate the lines, so you always would have the fresh in the front, the fresh meat. Stabby's still trying to recover from her little incident, so she's doing good. She has not suffocated herself yet, so we just want to commend her for her excellent breathing. So we talked a little bit about like the weapon and the dragon slaying, the fighting the evil big bad, but we haven't really talked about the role of magic that comes into the sword and the sorcery part. So how does that differentiate for standard high fantasy or just fantasy in general? The fact that the sorcery part is in the name.
Well, if you a lot of time in like the Jesus Christ, she's still left, but you get an inexperienced magic user, wizard, warlock, whatever, and their spells usually go awry, and it takes them a couple of tries to get it right. I think she mentioned that the Dungeons and Dragons movie that just came out, there was a lot of that going on. It was hilarious, and it made for good comic relief.
But you're talking about character progression or progression fantasy, which is an element of most of the larger genres. Do you think it has to be where the magic user, for it to be sword and sorcery, starts off as a bumbling idiot and learns as he goes?
No, not necessarily. I mean, look at Lord of the
character?
Rings. I mean, you get this masterful Gandalf, but he's also just as funny as the bumbling idiot wizard.
But was Lord of the Rings high fantasy or sword and sorcery?
I consider it sword and sorcery, and then becomes high fantasy because it starts with the hobbits. It starts with, these down to earth people, and then they just kind of stumble into shit that goes crazy. It's like, oh, we thought it was lost. Here it is. And now the Eye of Sauron is upon us. We need to find people that know what the hell they're doing, that have fought him before. So it starts off with just sword and sorcery, and then it moves into the high fantasy realm. By the time you get Return of the King, it's full high fantasy, or because you're starting to deal with kings and high elves and things like that. So that's probably why it's so revered and why it's so beloved, is because it does start as an everyman story, and at the core it is an everyman story. It just involves this high fantasy element when you get towards the end. No,
you have two really strong paths for your sorcery element. And the first one is the apprentice, and that's a lot of fun because everybody wants to go learn how to be magic. That's just such a dream for this audience. And the other one is where the wise old man is a wizard. And the wise old man puts you on a path and knows the information that you need to know in order to pursue the goals of the story. And you can have both of them, but you need one of them, I think, in order to really hit those sorcery tropes. Somebody has to either be working their way down the road towards being a capable magic user, or you have the wizard on the mountain who's going to give you the deus ex machina kind of information you need in order to move forward.
Well, the magic takes it out of just being historical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, otherwise we're telling stories of knights, and we're telling stories of armies, and we're telling stories of all that kind of stuff, and that's very, very nice, and it's fun. Bernard Cornwell is great fun to read, all of that kind of thing. But it becomes, the sword and sorcery is another one of those aspects of letting it be larger than life. It lets the stories be bigger. It lets unexpected things happen, because a battle changes entirely when you have a fireball involved. When you have to think about, what does that mean? And where is the wizard? And what can they do? It adds all of these unexpected aspects, and that changes it into a fantasy story instead of simply being a fighting story. Because otherwise, that's what it is. It's a story of the knights running at each other.
Well, you can do that with Fae. I just don't know that Fae hit the sorcery tag, which the genres are so slurried together and blended that I consider sword and sorcery to be something more of a subset of high fantasy than a cousin or a sibling.
Where I would say it's the Alabama of high fantasy.
Oh Lord, here we are again.
But Fae,
okay, Arkansas, maybe Mississippi, I don't know.
Fae don't
is definitely in the cut.
Sorcery. You need a magic user who is one of the core characters, but you can escape just historical and the romance fiction by adding Fae characters, and it makes it solidly second world. And there are a lot of different ways that it doesn't quite make it to Sword and Sorcery, maybe. But
look at the Princess Bride.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is for those second world sort of Sword and Sorcery fantasies, you'll still get some idiot reviewing them like, that's not how it was in the Middle Ages. I'm like, what part of second world did you miss? The magic users, the trolls, did that just all go over your head, or do you think those were real? And second, I want to give my hat tip to Chloe, who managed to pause and just roll with it as Nick interrupted for his shenanigans. She's been on the show enough; it doesn't even faze her anymore. She's just immune to our insanity, Nick. She's been inoculated against it.
Hi, Yukio.
All right. So, do you think you see a lot of magic weapons in the Sword and Sorcery? I mean, obviously you got the sorcerer throwing like fireballs or whatever, but you don't often see the magic weapons in the way you would see in a D&D campaign with the flame swords or whatever. In a lot of the Sword and Sorcery that I'm familiar with. Is that a modern thing to see it more? Or is it there?
It's so I think an important thing to highlight that we kind of missed that answers both these questions is we call it Sword and Sorcery, but at least with the origins of the subgenre, it's Sword versus Sorcery. The vast majority of the time, your hero does not wield magic. Your hero fights magic. And I think, as Isaac said in the side chat, magic is very dark, dangerous, and mysterious. Howard is a contemporary of Lovecraft, and they technically share a universe. They wrote letters to each other. They worked with each other's properties in some instance. And so the magics that you see are always a threat and are often wielded by big, dark necromancers and magicians in these giant towers that you have to fight. So the magic weapons don't tend to come until just a little bit later with things like Elric or He-Man, things like that. Nick, I will send you. There is a story where Conan ends up with a scrap with an eldritch creature. That is one of Howard's stories.
I'm almost gonna break not safe for work again. That is awesome. I didn't know that was a thing.
All right, Nathan.
F off! No, yes.
So I think that's really important to highlight, is that might be a reason why we don't see magic weapons until maybe a little after the genre has been established, is because magic was very often the enemy in the initial Sword and Sorcery tales.
Okay. Nathan, you said you had something you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, so if you're looking at magic and Sword and Sorcery and magic and high fantasy, if you have high fantasy, usually you have to understand the magic. You need to know how it works. You need the nuts and bolts, and it's hard magic. Sword and Sorcery, that's not a requirement. You do not need to understand how they cast the fireball. He just does. Who cares? You know, as Jesse was saying, your job is to chop the guy in half. Who cares how is he throwing fireballs at you? And that's a very important distinction between high fantasy and Sword and Sorcery. Especially because usually the main character doesn't use magic, and so therefore he can't understand
it. Based on Isaac's cat nodding along, it sounds like he agrees with you. So, just off frame, if you're listening. Isaac, you look like you were getting ready to say something. So, if you wanted to weigh into that.
Yeah, it's often. I've also seen it where. There's things where sometimes they have science goes so far as it crosses a border into magic. And with Sword and Sorcery, sometimes it goes reverse, where they go so far into magic and dimensions that it goes into science. Stephen Shrewsbury did a Sword and Sorcery series of novels, and I read the first one, and at least one villain that he fights goes beyond like a time travel or dimensions, where it's definitely science. People from different dimensions. It was also arguable that Army of Darkness is also Sword and Sorcery, It's jumped from horror to pulp to sword and sorcery, because he's in a medieval landscape where magic is the thing to do.
Was to be originally titled Ash versus the Medieval Dead.
Yes. And with the technology bordering on magic, with having a chainsaw
And his
to combat,
boomstick.
and his boomstick to combat undead deadites.
So that
Which are
go ahead.
To combat deadites, which are there because of magic gone wrong.
Okay. I know the understanding of magic comes up. I'm a huge fan of David Eddings. It's one of the first chapter books I read. And in his Bulgariad series, when the main character in the first book, one of the first times he does magic, he's in this bizarre, when I say bizarre, I mean like outdoor kind of marketplace. And he runs into someone who's blind, who bumps into him, and he falls to the ground, and he puts his hand on the guy's head, and he cures the blindness. And the grandmother character, I can't remember what she was to him, but that was one of her critiques, is the danger of doing magic you don't understand, because unless you know the nature of the brain and the eye and how that works, how can you fix it? And he just didn't think, he just did, and it worked. And that was the lesson, is it could have gone horribly wrong, because if you're messing with stuff you don't understand, you could make it worse. And that was the push and pull in that novel series of the magic, is instinctual magic versus like the science of magic. And I think you see some of that in sword and sorcery, though not as much. And it's more of a more modern sort of layer on top of the genre. So,
but I think it goes back to the kinds of stories that we talked about in the beginning. What kind of story are we telling? What themes do we carry through? Because like with every other subgenre that we ever discuss, you start getting into the who got the, how much chocolate is in the peanut butter and how much peanut butter is in the chocolate? Do we accept the magic this way or that way? Does it have to be this kind of weapon? And then we argue this with subgenres all the time, because that's what authors do. It's one of our favorite things to do, is to argue about exactly where in the subgenre does this book or this thing belong. But it goes back to these,
which we don't need to do.
Stories.
We don't need to do that.
Well, but it's fun. It's fun. But for readers,
it is fun.
And
You
for
talk
what we're
about
trying to
chocolate
present,
and peanut butter. I don't care the ratio.
Exactly.
Those two things are together. Let's eat. Let this woman
and
cook.
that's the whole thing. It's these kinds of stories that people love, and they love them in lots of different formats, because it goes back to those everyman characters, those larger than life, those things that we want to go on the adventure with them. This is why we play Dungeons and Dragons, is it goes back to these first sword and sorcery stories, because now we're playing those sword and sorcery people in our own little games.
Okay. Nathan, you look like you had something to say. So while we have a lull in the conversation, we'll let Canada Land talk.
I was just going to make fun of you, because Bulgarian it's not really epic. It's not really sword and sorcery. It's high fantasy. Doesn't follow the same tropes.
It has somebody with the sword versus the magic user of the big bad. So I could see it as sword and sorcery by the definition we set at the beginning of this. Okay, at the 45-minute mark of this episode, since we spent the first 42 minutes talking about weapons and magic fireballs. I don't know.
I'm saying that it's more high fantasy. It's not really about the everyman. He's the chosen one. He goes over and he's learning magic because that's his destiny.
When you say high fantasy, I tend to think of the pretentious nature of some of the originals in the genre, where it's like it takes itself very seriously and it's very obvious that it does. Whereas I did not get that impression with David Eddings' more workman-like prose with his more down-to-earth characters. It just didn't strike me as high fantasy because it just wasn't pretentious. But I guess that's a definitional thing. We'll have to have an episode where we talk about high fantasy. That'll be our next fantasy episode, and we'll have. We could do it in season 5. We're just getting started, buddy. And since we just hit 500 episodes not too long after or before this was aired, we've got room to grow, buddy. Only direction is up from the rock bottom.
Who watched us for all 500 episodes?
I did, but mostly because I was here for all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of the job. Yeah.
I mean, we get to talk to a lot of really cool people. But anyway, so like, I definitely think that's a discussion to have, is where that line of high fantasy is. But I think that's we'll save that for another episode. And Nathan, we'll schedule it around Canada time so you can be here for that one, so we can have that discussion more appropriately without derailing too much. But I see your disagreement, and we can let that stand. And you, dear listener, you can weigh in if you've read The Belgarion by David Eddings, where you think it fits. And if I'm wrong, ignore it and don't say anything. But if I'm right, send Nathan petty hate mail on his social media contacts, which will be linked in the show notes. All right, Jesse, you wanted to weigh into the high fantasy versus sword and sorcery distinction. It looked like you had something to say.
I just found the pretentious comment entertaining. That's going to be one that's going to get a lot of hate mail going to Stabby for her to deal with. I think more along the lines of the line between high fantasy would be how the effects of what's going on especially in the beginning affect things. I think that sword and sorcery tends to be a much more narrow tale. It tends to focus on the hero and the things that are important to the hero. High fantasy almost always goes at least global, or I'm sorry, at least country level, if not global. So, or continental level, if not global.
All right, so just because we were having a discussion, I went ahead and while you were talking, I Googled it. And according to Wikipedia, and we know they would never lie to us, all hail the Wikipedia gods. Sword and sorcery is a subgenre of fantasy that features heroes who use swords in violent, exciting adventures. It is also known as heroic fantasy and often includes elements of magic, romance, and supernatural. However, unlike high fantasy, sword and sorcery tales are more focused on personal battles than the world-ending events. I could see David Eddings' Belgariad blending the two because it was focused tightly on the main characters, but world-ending events. Robert E. Howard's work from the early 1930s is considered to be the origin of the sword and sorcery genre. Some examples of the heroes include Conan the Barbarian, F-A-F-H-R-D, Fafhrd, and the Grey Mouser, and then Beastmaster. The genre has evolved over time to include more diverse casts of characters, including female leads by C.J. Sherry's Morrigan Cycles, Jen Williams' Copper Cat Trilogy, and Elizabeth Bear's The Stone and the Skull. There you go. Wikipedia has broken it down, and I could see some high fantasy stories that also fit in the sword and sorcery genre. So it could be both peanut butter and chocolate. There you go, Jana.
Put those hands together, buddy.
Reese's Cups.
I have sort of a workman definition in my head that sword and sorcery takes place in the woods and high fantasy takes place at the castle.
True.
Works too.
Nailed it.
But I just want to know wherever the chocolate is where I'm going because I'm gluttonous. What can I say?
It's the cart next to where you punched out the camel.
Absolutely. Now, do you think location, where we're talking, because she mentioned the woods, for sword and sorcery, do you tend to see it in more of a proto-Europe setting where it's, woods and mountains? Is it, more in the plains? Is it exotic locales? Do you think there's a standard, or is it all over the place within the larger genre?
I would say it's outside of the cities. So I think it's as long as it's outside of the castle. So if it's in the plains, a forest, icy tundra, wherever, I think that's where these types of stories start.
It has a European flavor to it, typically, not as a defining feature of the genre, but just as a typical. And it'll be Arthurian or Viking works really well. I don't really see a Mediterranean setting for a lot of sword and sorcery just by volume.
But that would be cool to read.
Japanese and Chinese sword and sorcery really well.
There's a new one that they're calling Sword and Sandal, which is similar, more of the Mediterranean vibes to it. And I think some of that is just where the stories, because we're reading in English, come from. But you are starting to see more and more people do non-European fantasy settings. I think that's more of a...
Sword and Sandal, we called Conan that because he wandered around in a loincloth and sandals.
Like I rock
a defining difference between the He-Man Conan, the whole loincloth and little armor and lots of bulging muscles and sandals, and we called it sword and sandals. That we've been doing this since the 80s. And sword and sorcery became, they actually bothered to put armor on, which covered up all those beautiful muscles, and we didn't want them to do that anyway.
I'm just saying, I wore his outfit for Halloween one year, and people called the cops. They said it was an indecent exposure. I mean, it's not fair, Jana. It's not fair.
That's because the loincloth was in the back, JR.
Well, nobody gave me instruction manuals.
They're
just learn how to read, man.
Poor Nathan's dying of a heart attack over there in the bottom left square. Wait, is that the Jan Brady square he's in?
It might be.
Might be. All right, so
that ought to be Cindy, I think.
Okay.
Oh, that's scary.
Damn this show.
To try and get us back on track.
I'm going to get us back on track. So
save us.
Is there anything about the sword and sorcery genre, broadly speaking, because again, all of these initial episodes are broad, and we can always narrow it down later. And if you've got, dear listener, ideas to narrow down, send them our way. We might come up with it. Stabby, do you have something to add?
Let Jesse speak.
I was setting that up, Stabby. Jeez. Let Jesse speak.
Okay.
Let him cook.
I think darkness is a very important element. So we talked about the mountains, the tundras, and everything like that. But the darkness in the setting is really important. So Conan ventures all the way from Asgard and Samaria, which are framed off of Northern Europe, all the way down to Kush and the coast, which are very and Stygia, which are very like not European, Egyptian based. They're very based off of the dark a dark twist on ancient Egypt. And the whole point of the setting is that it happens in the dark place in history that we don't know what happened. And so I feel like that's important for the genre as well, is that there's always something like we talk about legend or Beastmaster or Conan, that there's always a very dark elements to the world. And that is addressed a lot more in sword and sorcery than high fantasy.
So, we got new merch coming. Apparently, Free Jesse's going to be our new hashtag. And if you normally listen to these episodes, most of the time I don't really say, unless it's a comic book episode, watch this. But just for the facial expressions alone, dear listener, hop over to the YouTubes, the BitChutes, or the Rumbles, and check this episode out. You need to. It's worth it, people. This is the one.
I'm going to replay this later on a down day where I'm not feeling good.
So that's a good point. I think, fighting the darkness, right? Like, it's almost man versus environment as much as it's man versus magic user. But that's true in a lot of fantasy without the modern comforts, I suspect. You end up combating the elements. Does anybody else have anything they want to throw in there before we wrap this up that we need to cover that we didn't?
Not this episode.
We will come back for a high fantasy episode.
We'll start over again.
We will come back for a high fantasy episodes. I'm already putting it on the calendar to book it. So this will be a thing, people. And I will try to get the same panel back if possible, just so we can continue the shenanigans that we started tonight. You're welcome, or we're sorry. We don't know which is the right one for this. But with that, this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. And with that, we're going to let our guests tell us what they're working on right now. And this is future you in 2025 in January. So time travel. But if you could tell us what you think you'll be working on in January and then how we can find you. We'll start with you, Jesse, and we'll just sort of work our way around robin.
Cool. So hopefully at this point, by the time you are looking at this, current short stories for Rune Red Eagle are complete. And I am fully in the middle of constructing the Holy Diver in the Midnight Sea novel and anthology, hopefully coming out the end of 2025. I have to wrangle all the cats and publishers and all of those things. And yeah, that'll be what we're working on.
And how can we find you on
if you want to find me, outlawauthor.com has all of my stuff on it. There's some cool artwork and things. You can see some of my characters. You can find me on Instagram, full name, Jesse James Fain. You can find me on Substack, Outlaw Author. And you can find me on Twitter at Jesse James Books. And you can find me on Facebook if you really want to, but as I always warn everyone, that is a personal page, so you're going to get a lot more than just my writing, lots of guns, tattoos, and smartassery.
I like smartassery. That is my favorite word. All right, Jana, what is future you going to be writing, and then how can they stalk you? I mean, follow you online.
Stalk me, cool. That's a really good question. Yeah, Future Me has so many different options, and I'm currently wrangling cats that look a lot like squirrels on crack, trying to figure out what it is I'm going to work on next. So I'm finishing up some urban fantasy. I have to get that done. I have promised my mother, and as we all know, once you make a promise to your mother, that's it. That must happen. So I have promised my mother I will finish these 2 books, and then after that, there's some spaceship shenanigans that might be a possibility. There's a space western I need to go back to. So there's lots of possibilities, but it's all going to be fun. And I can be found at opalkingdompress.com or on Amazon, Facebook, and all the various other places under Jena Rey or Jena Rey Author. And in February, if you happen to be going to Superstars of Writing, if you're an author, you can come and visit me there because I'll be presenting. And I'll also be at Life, the Universe, and Everything. And that's here in Utah. So come and visit me. I get lonely.
So just checking, is the squirrels that are on crack, do they share with the hamsters on crack? Because our friend Melissa.
I'll ask Melissa.
Yeah.
I'll ask Melissa.
All right, out freaking standing. Nathan, what will future you be writing, and then how can we stalk you online?
Everything. No. I will be working on I don't have a name for it really. It's my Fantasy Mecha series. It's where the main character fights in a giant mecha suits, fighting the evil sorceress who wants to take over the world, and he has to stop her. So he has a big giant mecha, and he goes around killing dragons and trolls and fighting magical items.
Nice. All right, Chloe, what will future you be writing, and then how can we stalk you online?
I am finishing out a space opera 4-book installation to my current series, Carbon Chronicles, and rounding immediately into snarky paranormal detective urban fantasy that has been just waiting for me to come back to it. I cannot wait to go write in that voice again. So January is a great month.
This is the way when you like what you're writing. All right, Isaac, what will future you be writing? And then how can they follow you online?
Very short stories, hopefully. I'm also hopefully going to be outlining and working on book 2 of my young adult series. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm also on Amazon and Instagram.
Okay. And with that, you can follow. Oh, hold on. We forgot. Stabby, unmute. What is your coffee poison of the day? What are you drinking?
So, as you know, I am a sucker for all of their holiday stuff. And right before the holiday season ended, they released an apple cinnamon strudel coffee.
Ooh.
Yeah. And they also released a peach cinnamon coffee.
I'm digging it. All right.
I also have a 12-day advent calendar that you can get. They're selling it even beyond the Christmas season. And they also just released a whole new line of organic teas for our tea drinkers, which include a chai tea, an English breakfast tea, one called gunpowder green, an Earl Grey, and a chamomile lavender.
We need to get a soundboard so we can do like sound bites when people say silly stuff. And we need that Quaker Oats guy with the big glasses, the old white-haired guy, talking about the diabetes. Because every time we talk about our dietary issues, I just keep thinking I'm gaining 100 pounds just listening to you talk about it. And I
Good
will say, there are some authors that do need trigger warnings, and not for the normal, mumbo
You
jumbo.
mean the menu?
But it's like, don't read this if you're hungry. Don't read this if you're on a diet. Like Melissa McShane, she describes food too much. I'm like, you know what? I'm hungry. I need to not read her right now. Pause that book. I'll come back after I've eaten, not during a fast. Because I tried to listen to her during a fast once, and I broke the fast 10 hours early, and it's all her fault that I had no willpower.
Read the menu on Stabby's books that she reads. Oh my God.
Trigger warnings menu. Whatevs. All right. And
the menu.
You can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save your shenanigans for Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. And if you want to talk about how wrong I am about poutine, it's a war crime, send it to Stabby on her social media contacts, and maybe you can commiserate with her. And then, she can plot mass homicide, as one does on the internet. You could go to our website.
I will force JR to eat more poutine.
No, like the Geneva Convention prohibits you from doing that. We have our website linked on the link tree. Bunch of gobbledygook. Don't hate me, hate Spotify. They made the links really, really weird. But if you click there, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. Or you could support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. And with that, be sure to put in the comment sections for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-host duly inebriated until they don't remember what poutine is, and we never have to talk about it again, people. That's what we call a callback in the industry, because we're professionals. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, thank you everyone for coming on. This was fun. We went far afield, and then we came back sometimes. Jesse did try, though. In his defense, he does get the MVP for today, because he kept trying to circle us back with that little hook and stick that he's like pulling us back on stage. So good job, Jesse. You're the MVP today. And with that, we're going to hit the end button before they start cussing.